This is Human Capital, a goal-span podcast, and I'm Jeff Hunt. On Human Capital, I get to interview top business thought leaders to uncover the deeply human aspect of work. On this episode, we will talk about overcoming adversity, entrepreneurship, and how deep relationships, trust, and core values can lead to a more successful and fulfilling work experience. My guest today is Nathan Bourne, who is the founder and CEO at MyCORE. Nathan lives by the belief that service to many leads to greatness. He has found a way to serve many people in his life through leadership. And at the age of 20, as a Division I wrestler and Ivy League student at UPenn, Nathan says he discovered entrepreneurship. Today, he leads an innovative company in the payroll benefits, accounting, and HR space that serves clients all over the US. Nathan's favorite quote is, "If you have 6 hours to cut down a tree, spend 4 hours sharpening your axe and 2 hours cutting down the tree." Nathan has shared that he wants to inspire people to constantly sharpen their axe as they pursue life's purpose. Welcome, Nathan.
Hey, what's happening, Jeff? Happy to be here.
How was that hearing my intro of you? I always like to, ask that. So
I'm glad you asked that. It's got to be I hope it's as awkward for everyone else as it is for me. It's a good awkward though.
Well, I'm super excited to have you on the show today. In part because I loved sort of meeting you and learning about your experiences in business, and you come at it from a very unique perspective. And so I would love for you to share, maybe as we get started, who or what inspired you to go into business originally?
Totally. Yeah, I would be remiss if I didn't share kind of my upbringing,
Sure.
my childhood, if you will. It's kind of unique, and it was uniquely challenging. And I always think maybe at some age I'll stop talking about it because when I first started as an entrepreneur, I was so young. It was fresh. It was just a few years ago. Now I'm a wise old man at 32 and know everything you need to know about life. Right. But no, it really has informed a lot of my path, for better or for worse, some great, some not so great. But I am from a really big family.
Okay.
I'm the fourth of 9 children, Jeff. So
Wow.
Big family. Yeah. My parents got married at 18 and 19. There's now 19 grandkids. My oldest sibling is 39. My youngest sibling turned 18 recently. And my mom turned 58, I think the 31st, a couple of days ago.
Wow.
So young parents, 19 grandkids, total chaos. And we grew up very, very poor. So, even if you made 6 figures and you had 9 kids, you'd be poor, but they were like poor. So
yeah.
That kind of equipped me in unique ways that entrepreneurship requires because of the ability to survive through it.
Sure.
For most people, that's most people's narrative. Some others that build something first and then kind of embark without maybe the financial strain of it. But yeah, so that put me on a path early on that I was really by the book, which was academics and athletics. And you kind of mentioned it there in the intro. I realized, okay, here's my path to kind of living the good life. And I just was really dedicated to my academics and to athletics and specifically wrestling. And that landed me at the University of Pennsylvania. And that was a great honor to be able to go to a school like that and to wrestle at that level. But it was actually the summer of my freshman year. So I just had graduated high school. I'm going into my freshman year. And I just got infected by entrepreneurship. And as you know, it's a bit of a disease.
It is. Isn't it?
Yeah, it's a bug. It's a virus. Yeah. Entrepreneurship 19 or whatever you want to call it. It's something that will systemically take over your being. So I think it's important for people to evaluate whether they are really made for it. because they can really damage their lives if they're not. So I think this is something that is sort of the ugly, dark side of entrepreneurship that we should consider. And I've thought of this analogy before. I'll share it, and I don't know if it'll totally make sense in this moment. But have you ever shot a bow and arrow? Ever done archery or hunted?
Yes, I have. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So I grew up in a big family of hunters. But when we bow hunted, we did it with a recurve bow. So not the compound. It's like the old school kind, the way the Indians used to. Native Americans, I don't even know if I'm allowed to say that. But so nonetheless, when you put an arrow on a bow, which there's a word for that too. It's called a knock. You knock, okay. I think. Mm-hmm. That arrow sitting by itself or even knocked onto the bow is of no threat, right? It's just sitting there, much like a knife or a gun if it doesn't have anything behind it. Mm-hmm. So what actually makes that arrow lethal is pulling back the bow, right?
Interesting.
So if you think of this, we're all sort of this arrow in our life. And unless we're willing to pull back on all of our past experiences, all of our past challenges, some of the good and the bad and the ugly of the things that came before this moment, then we won't gain enough power. There won't be enough velocity to traject and push that arrow or yourself or your goal or your dream or your vision forward.
Sure.
That's one part of it, but there's also this other part, I think, which is the discipline to keep the bow pulled back. And then if you let go, you're going to move forward. You're going to have some type of trajectory. But the more discipline you have and patience you have to raise the bow and raise the bow and raise it and raise it, now you start to see something like in an old medieval movie or in Robin Hood where they're on the archers, are on the castle and they're kind of shooting it way out into the field. And
I love that picture that you've painted. And I actually want to stay on this line for just a minute because it's applicable in so many respects, not only to entrepreneurs, but to employees, to managers, to leaders, to business owners alike. And I'd love you to share for a minute how fear comes into this equation. So you think of the archer pulling back the bow and holding it up and waiting and waiting and waiting, or to your quote, the person who's sharpening their axe for 6 hours and then cutting down the tree for 2. Right. Where can people find the intersection between wisdom and execution versus fear and being paralyzed in terms of moving forward, like over preparing, if you will? So talk a little bit about that.
We have to start to really seek wisdom. And I think that's the space that we're in right now. And I think the leaders that ask for wisdom and seek it will find it. And that's how they're going to attract people to them. And it has to be rooted in humility, because the guru model, I know it all, I have it all, look at me, this is where I was, this is where I am. I think people have looked under the hood of that and said, no, you're just human. You're like the rest of us. So I think it's important in this process and in this journey to show that you're just that. You're in a process and you're in a journey. And the language matters. So it's things like, I'm learning that, or I'm discovering. It's the difference between ing and ed. So it's not I discovered or I learned, it's I'm learning, I'm discovering. And it puts it in this present moment that people can connect to and identify with and say, hey, me too. And that's where the iron starts to sharpen iron. So I think, to bring it back to human capital, that's the space that people want to operate in. If that makes sense.
It does. And I really love your description of the ing versus the ed, because so often people go through their careers on this pathway thinking that if they just X, then Y will happen. So if they get the promotion, they're going to be completely fulfilled in their life, and they're going to reach the sort of nirvana that they've been looking for, trying to fill that empty void and deep inside them, and it never ever happens. So it also seems totally applicable, and I'm curious as to your opinion about this. The most effective leaders are those that actually embody vulnerability and vulnerability-based trust. And so those ones that are willing to say that I am learning, we are growing, instead of we've arrived, or, look at us, how great we are. Those are the ones that sort of outperform and out-achieve other leaders that are much less humility-based kind of leadership. Would you agree with that?
The earlier you can show your team and the people around you how flawed you are, the better. Like let that be known right out of the gate. It does a couple things. One, it humanizes you, and it also attracts really great people.
Sure.
Yeah, it's about being your true, authentic self, and understanding that is the good and the bad. That's the light and the dark.
Exactly.
And really what it is, what's crazy too, I've thought about this recently, is trust. So trust is the foundation of all relationships. And you would think that trust means things like, well, you'll never stab me in the back, or you'll never take advantage of me, or you'll never do me wrong. Sure, that goes without saying. Some of those integrity character issues that are universal. Yet there's going to be times where, if we're business partners, I'm going to screw you over a little bit, and you're going to screw me over a little bit, or I'm going to be like, that's just the human experience. That's the human condition. So, hopefully it's not huge blows, like you ruin the person's life or something, but there's going to be these little deviations. There's going to be these little moments where you're like, well, that didn't feel right. So how do you overcome that? How do you process through that? I've learned that it's in consistency. So what's interesting is, if you think of cinema, like movies or television shows, and I like to think of this as an example because I'm a big fan of this show. Have you ever watched The Blacklist?
I haven't.
It's really cool. So it's about this guy who's like the world's most wanted criminal, and he turns himself into the FBI, and then he essentially promises that he's going to deliver them a blacklister, which is a criminal that they don't even know about, that's doing biological warfare or something. Sure. So he ends up, kind of controlling and manipulating the FBI, but he's a good guy at the end. Anyway, here's the thing. That guy kills a lot of people, like throughout the show, like just shooting people right in the head, right? And as a viewer, in general, people don't want other people to get shot in the head. Like general consensus, don't shoot people in the head.
Right.
So what's interesting is there's these moments throughout the character development where he's in a scene and the person's like, in a back alley, or they're in a like warehouse somewhere. And it's so in his character to end that person because they, broke loyalty, or they deviated from his sort of authority. Yeah. That you're sitting there as a good human being, waiting for the moment where he just puts a bullet in the guy's head, and you're like, yeah. And then you're like, wait, what? Like, that's sick. Why do I want that? It's because you trust his character to do that. There's a consistency. There's a continuity in the way that he behaves. So it's not even good or bad. It's good not to shoot somebody in the head. It's bad to shoot somebody in the head. Right. It's you're trusting that he's going to do it, and you're okay with that. Right. You're okay. You somehow reconcile it because it's true to who he is. So if you're in leadership, and hopefully it's not you're not a murderer, but there's things about you that are maybe not like the greatest, fluffiest, warmest things, but you're consistent in them. People love that because they're going, I know that he's going to fire that person because they did something unethical, even though they're best friends. That person's getting canned today. And if you don't do that, you just sent a message to the core of people that goes, whoa, I can't trust your next move. Sure. And I need to have some level of predictability. Not that you're like some machine, but I need to know where I show up every day in the workplace, in this marriage, at this church, in this branch of government. So I've found that, and in my leadership, I've come across decisions where I'm like, what would Nathan do? It goes back to that third person. I'm like, what would third party, what would I do in this situation? I'm like, yep, dismiss them. They got to go, they got to go, yeah. Or forgive them. We give them another chance. So I think those core values, those principles, that foundation, building that is everything. The identity sure. of the company, the identity of the leadership, it informs everything. And that's where you get the bond. That's where you get the glue. That's where you get the teamwork making the dream work. Sure. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I think core values are such a great reference point because too often they're misunderstood by organizations. People say they have core values. They may have 6, 8, 10, 15 that are on the wall, but they're not actually the behaviors that you were describing that people are living out every day in the workplace.
Yeah.
They are, and so you end up with a disconnect and a lack of continuity and alignment because it says that our core value is maybe work ethic, but right. yet nobody's working more than 4 hours a day. So yep. how, and then if I get chastised for not working hard enough, then we have even greater resentment internally and disengagement and problems that sort of come as a result. Would you agree with that?
Oh my gosh. Yeah. And choose wisely. And this is the challenge that we have too. I think we get these lofty principles. Like how funny would it be, but also accurate, if an organization had like some of their core values and it was like mediocre work at best.
Yeah, exactly.
Or like consistent output that has decent value to it, right? That would actually probably hold more. An organization.
It would be better, wouldn't it?
It'd be better. It'd be
because
way
it's
better.
Yeah,
because it's
authentic.
It's authentic. They go, shit, okay,
Exactly.
You guys are like just above average. Well, my lawn just needs to be cut like just above average. So screw it, I'll hire you. But it's all these words like premier, first class, the best ever. And yes. I took all that out of MyCORE. We have a principle we call lead with who. And it's this sort of clever way of saying who we are is who we are. For better or for worse, we're going to constantly advance it into improvement, into betterment, into enlightenment. We want to reach those higher level operating systems. Yet the X factor is that we are who we are, and you are who you are, and we're looking for alignment in those things. But it is on an infinite game. It is an infinite thing. It's not something that we just stamp and say, this is who we are. And we're so great, because I think nobody ever lives up to it. And then when the hammer drops, it's so much worse when we've created this perfection.
Yeah. And just to summarize a little bit before we get into a few lightning round questions.
For sure.
We've danced around a lot of issues, but it sounds like really to bring it all together, you have vulnerability-based leadership and trust infused from the top level of the organization, combined with very meaningful and authentic core values that describe who you are as an organization. And we didn't talk too much about this, but a vision that you have as leaders that is compelling, that you can rally around. Then you create the environment where people can be inspired, and as they work together, they leverage deep relationships with each other to achieve this common vision as a team. Is that a decent way to sort of encapsulate what you were just describing?
Totally. Yeah. So it's so it goes like this. Leading with who is about understanding that at the core is the who. It's the who's. And it's the who. So it's the people, and it's the identity, the melding of those identities, and understanding that people are individuals, but they're also collective. As a wrestler, this was a good kind of prerequisite for the way I operate my business, because I had to be an individual, and then I was part of a team. And it's an individual sport, but it's a team sport at the same time. Mm-hmm. You can't go out there and wrestle yourself, right? So
right. Mm-hmm.
Then when that core, that inner circle is built, now you can start to look at a why. You can start to look at a mission. You can start to look at a motive, a purpose. And this is why I preach leading with who versus starting with why. I'm a big Simon Sinek fan, and I respect him greatly. And he's been a big inspiration to my thinking and to my leadership style and the way I've constructed MyCORE. I think there's something deeper that is really what anchors it all. And it's to lead with who. Because to me, starting with why, if there's a start to something, there's probably a finish, right? Which to me is more finite. And actually, Simon Sinek specifically came out with the next book, The Infinite Game. So I think he on his journey and his discovery realized, okay, maybe there's something even greater here, and he's connected the two philosophies. So what I have found in my leadership and just sort of operating with human beings is that whys change, that missions change, but who you are doesn't. So who the United States is, our Constitution, that is the most core, and it has amendments and it gets outdated, and there's things that have to be updated for sure, but it's the Constitution, right? That's who we are as the United States of America. And then why we are, our missions, they change. It could be a mission to Afghanistan. It could be a mission to, eradicate hunger, universal healthcare, whatever it is. And there's all kinds of views on this. Sure. But in business, it's no different. When you have the who factor right, and then you rally around a why, and be very intentional about this why. Make sure that it's big enough to like hurt a little bit. Like it should be like, whew, that's bold, that's big, but it's not so universal that it's wishy-washy or sure. As I like to say, hooey. It's not, up in the ether. So our mission at MyCORE is to be the world's most employee-centric company, to be the world's most employee-centric company. So we have a mission, we have a why that is our North Star that we move toward and measure, regularly, quarterly, monthly, all the time, really. Those two things, who we are and why we exist, they don't change. But what we do and how we do it changes all the time. Sure. It's constantly changing. And I think what happens is that leaders identify a need in the market, entrepreneurs identify a need in the market, and then they get into problem solving mode, but they don't work on the core. They don't go through the intellectual process of who they are and why they exist. And God forbid that what change through legislation, technology, innovation, something outward that you can't control, like COVID-19. Now, all of a sudden you're going, oh, shoot. Yeah. But the real test, the real litmus test, and this would be a good question for anyone listening to ask themselves. If I went to my organization, I went to my team, I went to my people today and said, here's the deal. We are no longer doing what we do. We've changed we're going into a completely different industry. Would your people stick with you? Would they pivot through that? Would they move through that? And if you led with what up to that point, then probably not, because they identify with you based on what the organization does. But if they're aligned with you, connected to you, committed to you, and you're committed to them based on who you are and why you exist, the what doesn't matter. You met Cheryl. Yes. And you saw that she has our shield tattooed on her arm. That's not something you see every day, right? That one of the employees of the company gets the company logo on the arm. Tony, who you met as well, our chief strategy officer. I know my people. And if I said to them tomorrow, hey, we're going in a completely different space. We're not in payroll, benefits, HR, bookkeeping, accounting, and taxes. We're going into real estate. We're going into tech. They'd be like, sweet, because I'm not here for what we do. Sure. I'm here because of who we are and why we exist.
Sure. That's awesome. And who feels like it's really much more about character and relationship versus why. So what you're describing makes perfect sense. So I love that. So let's jump into some lightning round questions.
Let's do it.
I haven't mentioned any of these to you at all. And so I'm looking for just whatever comes to mind, short answers, whatever you can think of. So the first one is, What is the most difficult leadership lesson you've learned over your career?
Ooh. Um, the most probably difficult is that people are not going to love your company as much as you are.
Mm.
And that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
And at first I thought that everybody had to share my devotion and my dedication, but by definition I founded it. So why would they love my baby as much as they would love their own? So I love my nieces and nephews, but not the way I love my 3 children.
Mm-hmm.
They're family. They're important to me. I would do anything for them. But it's just different. And when I recognized that, I was able to assess the relationship better and be more thankful for the love that they do have for the company and respect and love them for that.
Great perspective. Great perspective. What are you most profoundly grateful for?
My relationship with God.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I have to be. I mean, without that, none of it matters, right? It's just that's the priority. It's faith, family, finance, and those things are not fixed. So we say that because it sounds nice. So faith, family, finance, God, my family, my money, my business. But the truth is, it's like this running race and scale. And there's times where I'm putting my finances ahead of my family, or my family ahead of God. And there's times where God gets even lower on the totem pole. And then I get smacked in the face by it. And I'm like, all right, what am I doing? I got to get my priorities right. So I think this is a larger issue. I won't go into it deeply, but core values are fixed, but they're fluid at the same time. So if we don't give them the respect that they deserve as living, breathing organisms, we won't steward them well enough. We'll think that just because it's on a plaque, because you read it in the Bible, because it was taught to you as a child, it's there, and we'll deviate from our values and find ourselves doing things that we never thought we would. So I think there's this prioritization and constant building of that muscle that has to occur. But to answer the question, if it wasn't for my relationship with God, I just think I would be an absolute wreck, I'm like already kind of a wreck, but I'd be like an absolute wreck.
Exactly. Who is one person you would interview, dead or alive?
I love Jim Rohn. Are you familiar with Jim Rohn?
No.
Jim Rohn he's sort of the OG of personal development. So Anthony Robbins was mentored by him, Darren Hardy, and he revolutionized my life at 20 years old. Maybe I was 21 at the time, but I listened to an audio. He's passed away now, probably about 5-8 years ago. He passed away, but he lays out this formula for life, which he speaks to how your philosophies drive your attitude determines your actions give you your results, and your results give you your life or your lifestyle. And when I learned that at 21, it just changed the way that I thought about everything, because I was always, like most people, understanding cause and effect. These are my actions, these are my results. I study for the test, I get a good grade. I show up for practice, I win the match. And then things started to go awry in my life as I was getting older. And I'm like, what's going on? Because I had this formula in middle school and high school that led me to success. And now it's not working the way I thought it would. And I realized it was under the surface. It was in the root system. It was in the foundation, and that some of my philosophies, my belief systems, were driving an attitude that unconsciously, to me, I was incompetent. I didn't know what I didn't know. And when I became aware of that, I started to really assess them. And just because you assess them, it still took me about a decade. I feel like just recently in the last year, I've got like a handle on it, where I'm like, okay, I've been on this 10-year journey, and there's a lot of life in there between having children, being divorced, like all kinds of hardship, and some triumph, but mainly hardship. But I would love to talk to him, because he just was a single, like, I can point to that individual and say his wisdom changed the trajectory of my life. And I'd love to have a conversation with him. Unfortunately, he's passed away.
And you were just describing again the ing versus the ed, by the way. So
Oh, cool.
it's a lifelong journey,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, you're right. Yeah,
Let's remember
totally.
that. Let's remember
Yeah,
that.
that's good.
What's your favorite non-work activity?
Oh my. I don't know that I have any. Playing with my kids.
Okay, that's awesome.
Yeah, it's so much fun. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I fight for it because one, I'm divorced, so my time with them is rooted in quality versus quantity. And the workplace is so integrated now, it's all on my phone, it's on my laptop. And when I have them, things pop up, things have to happen. So I feel a lot of guilt sometimes when I'm not as present. I'll put a movie on and I'll be doing something and I'm like, I guess I could be like playing with them. But like this past weekend, I had them for a 3-day weekend and we played Trouble a bunch. We played games. It snowed and that was fun. And if I can just work and hang out with my kids, I like to work out in that too, but that's good for me. Eat, sleep, work, and kids. Like
Very
I'm easy.
fulfilling.
Yeah.
Sounds very fulfilling. So that's awesome. So Nathan, what is the single most important thing you want our human capital listeners to take away from our talk today?
I have to give you my universal answer, which is to lead with who in everything you do. Our vision at MyCORE is all people in everything we do lead with who. That's what we want for the world. And the way we distinguish vision and mission, I learned this a couple of years ago and it helped me. I'll share it quickly, was that your vision is what you want for the world without you even being here. So it's not 2021, it's 3021. It's 1,000 years hence. What does the world look like? That should be your vision. And then your mission is what you're doing about it right now, real time, while you are on planet Earth. So lead with who is the answer.
That's a great way to summarize our time together. So Nathan, thank you so much for joining me. I really was inspired by our conversation. I hope our listeners were too, and I hope you enjoyed our time together.
Oh, I did. It was awesome. Thank you, Jeff.
Thanks. Take care. Thanks for listening to the show this week. We release a new episode of Human Capital on the first and third Tuesday of each month. I would really like to know what you thought of this episode. Send your comments to humancapital@goalspan.com. Human Capital is produced by Goalspan. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and please share this podcast with your colleagues, team, or friends. Thanks for being human, kind.